my screen. I'll do a quick intro. So
yes, I just need to make you co-host. Just 1 second. Okay, you should be able to present now.
okay, let me share. All right, so we share. All right, and probably we can go because we are short on time. So, good evening, everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So just a quick one that we're going to record the session and we're going to host it on a YouTube channel, UK DevOps Collective, so you can get it there. As well, we are running a small initiative to our presenters, so feel free to buy a coffee to our presenters for sharing the great content with us. You can go to buymeacoffee.com and UK Cloud, the UK user group. And today's guest is an independent IT consultant and a trainer who is training and specializes in DevOps and delivery consultancy, who focuses on teams and flow. And he is the lead editor who delivered a number of team guides to software operability, metrics for business decisions, software testability, and software releasability. As well, he's the co-author of a book, Team Topologies, and that you can get it on Amazon, and is a founder of DevOps User Group in Lisbon. So, Manuel, thank you so much for being with us today. And it looks like you are quite busy, and we've all. So just before we start, I would like to ask, how did you come up with writing a book on a book of team topologies, and what do you cover in this book?
Hi, Marty. So apologies again from my side on the delay. I thought Microsoft Teams would work on the web, on the browser as presented, but it didn't, so we couldn't make it work. So anyway, we're here now. And to answer your question, yeah, the book came from some, a few years of consulting together with Matthew Skelton, the other co-author. And we were helping clients adopt DevOps and understand what it means around, 2015, 16, 17. And then we just came across often problems with the, interactions between teams, the fact that it wasn't very clear whose responsibility it was to do certain things, around infrastructure, security, and other aspects. So we were, as we were consulting, we were also discussing what were the patterns we saw that work and what didn't work. And that conversation effectively, we actually started with something called DevOps Topologies that maybe some people have heard about, which is a website with some patterns, anti-patterns, and then that kind of expanded into team topologies, which has a lot of more kind of research and case studies and so on.
Well, that sounds interesting. So, guys, if you enjoyed, feel free to get one on Amazon. And yeah, let's get with today's topic.
All right. So let me share then. Share my screen now. All right. I think you should be seeing the screen. Just setting up my second screen here. Okay. So let's get started then with the talk. And so I'm going to talk about why Kubernetes is not your real platform. It's not your it's not the end when we're talking about platforms. It's really just a foundation. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that. As Marty mentioned, I'm the co-author of the book Team Topologies, which was published about a little bit over a year ago. And so this talk, is applying some of the ideas of team topologies and patterns to how organizations have been using Kubernetes. So there are four main things. So let's start with, this discussion. Is it really the platform or not? And then we'll look at what is team cognitive load, why does that matter for this discussion, team interactions, and a little bit on how to get started. And so when we're talking about platform, of course, it's quite overloaded word, right? Can mean a lot of different things for different people. And we need to define it more precisely to actually have a good discussion. But before we do that, I wanted to give you an example of where, just considering Kubernetes as kind of the platform in itself might be not the full picture. And so actually, I'm also the DevOps lead editor for site infoq.com. So maybe if you know about it. And so about, it was March last year, so it's been a while. I attended this conference that called QCon London in March, and then I wrote about one of the stories, which was from an engineer, Melanie Cebula at Airbnb, and she was talking about how they simplified Kubernetes workflow for their 1,000+ engineers at the time, so a year and a half ago. And so this, I thought this would get I thought it was quite interesting, the talk. So you have the links there as well. And the piece I wrote, the summary, actually got, I guess we can say, viral. When we looked at the views, it got like more than 20,000 views in the first week alone. So that's really quite impressive. And I think the reason to me was, when I looked at it, was actually a lot of organizations and developers and teams are struggling a little bit with introducing Kubernetes. And then it's actually not just something that's easy to deal with and to understand, kind of bare bones, right? And so the fact that many people were looking at this story because it talked about simplifying the workflow, making it easier to for our engineering teams to actually leverage the power of Kubernetes without having to understand perhaps all the details that you would have if you just try to use it as it comes out of the box. I thought that seemed to be, to me, one of the main reasons. Of course, Airbnb is an interesting company for many people, but I think that was one of the key reasons, because effectively Kubernetes helps us, with a lot of things. In particular, as organizations are also trying to migrate or be more kind of microservices oriented for their architecture. It helps us deal with all of the operational complexity around doing that, provides a lot of capabilities. And it also helps on kind of the development side to provide better, bit higher level abstractions for deployment and running our services, right? So that's all good, all provides us some benefits. But when you introduce Kubernetes, it's still, especially if it's not running as a managed service, then there's still a lot of other things you need to do, right? Just some examples here. You need to design your clusters, how many we're going to have, how we're going to use different types of environments for testing, development, production, and so on. All this stuff that you need to worry about and be concerned with. So what I'm saying is, effectively, Kubernetes is, to me, is a bit like an elephant entering the room, right? When you introduce it in an organization, not something small that you can kind of take in small chunks, right? You have to take it as a whole. And so if we do that without then thinking about who is going to be responsible for this, so who is the provider, if you like, of the Kubernetes-based platform in the organization, and also who is the consumer and where are the boundaries, right? So that we understand where does responsibility lie for different parts of the platform. In particular, in this case, what Kubernetes offers. And so if we're saying we're just going to use it kind of bare bones, just let development teams basically use the APIs and everything that it provides as it is, then that's probably going to be a lot for a team to take in and to actually kind of become reasonably proficient with in a short time frame. And so we do need to think about what are the kind of the teams that we have, who is going to take responsibility for what, how do we provide this sort of platform in a way that fits the needs of our consumers, our internal customers, right? So even more importantly, can we actually identify what do our internal engineering teams need, so that we can know if we're addressing those needs with the platform that we're providing. And typically those needs might not be met simply by just with Kubernetes as a tool by itself. So it's kind of complicated, right? the boundaries are often blurry in an organization in terms of who's responsible for what. How are we, who are the consumers, who is actually going to be benefiting from this? Are we actually addressing their needs? Or are we just kind of focused on technology by itself for the sake of technology? In which case we're probably missing the point, in the sense of we're not actually using this to the most benefit of our internal teams. So going back to fact that we need to define the platform, right? If we don't define the platform, then it's hard to kind of discuss if we have it or not. So in team topologies, we kind of adopted this definition from Evan Butcher. He's a consultant at ThoughtWorks in Australia, and we found this quite very much in line with what we talk about in terms of platforms as a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, and services, of course, but also the knowledge and support arranged as a compelling internal product. So there's a lot to kind of unpack here. Some of the key things that you see there is that it's a foundation. It's not, it's something that's going to evolve. It's something that you build on top, that you build your products on top by using these self-service capabilities, right? So it's something that the consumer should be able to self-serve, so they should not have to wait on other teams to reply to some requests or do some things for them. We want them to have the autonomy to use the platform when they need it and not have dependencies on other teams. And also it talks about knowledge and support. So that implicitly, of course, means we need teams that are kind of responsible for this platform that provide this sort of high quality documentation, provide support, that maybe we have different levels of support for different services or for different aspects perhaps. So we make that as clear as possible. Is this supported 24/7 by this platform team, or is it something during office hours? How can people know about the status of the different services in the platform, etc. And the last bit is also key, that we treat this platform as a compelling internal product, right? So it means it's something adequate and fit for the needs of our internal teams. It's not something that we can buy out of the box. Each organization has their own context. Their teams have their own maturity, their own needs in terms of what they're delivering in terms of products to the end customers. And so the platform is going to be different between different organizations, even if they're both using Kubernetes. And so effectively, there's something on top of that kind of technology that we can get out of the box. And we need to think about this as an internal product that is going to meet the needs and the things that our teams need to do. And therefore, we come back to the title of the talk, that Kubernetes is not the platform in itself, its foundation is quite an impressive foundation. Of course, it provides a lot of the things we need around, scaling up and down, self-healing, service discovery, you name it. There's all sorts of functionality, and it just keeps growing. But we need to kind of have something internally that actually makes this easier to use, makes this a good fit for our teams. So we're going to look into a bit more on that Airbnb example, just to give you a better idea of what I mean. But effectively, what we want the platform to do is create this path of least resistance, as Evan Butcher called it. Make the right thing the easiest thing to do. And so Kubernetes helps us because it already provides a lot of the right things, but we still need to adapt that to our internal team needs. And so this also means that the fact that we treat the platform as a product means that we are, focused on the customer. We don't get to decide as a platform team, if you like, or Kubernetes team. We shouldn't be deciding. We can't effectively decide what's the right thing for our teams in isolation, right? We might have an idea, but we always need to have this sort of interaction with the consumers, with our customers, to really understand what do they need. Because the hard thing about platforms is that we're going to need to constantly evolve and adapt, right? So the needs of our consumers, our internal teams are going to evolve over time. Their maturity is also going to evolve, and as they learn how to do things more effectively. So if we want the platform to continuously kind of grow and provide value, we need to, it needs to evolve constantly. And so the platform, as we're going to see next, is also a key enabler of reducing team cognitive load. So before I explain what cognitive load is, in the book, we talk about 4 fundamental types of teams topologies. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of them. But in our experience, so in the consulting experience we had, and then looking at examples from other organizations as well, we think that these are the 4 fundamental types of teams that we need for modern software delivery and operations, where we want to have fast delivery, fast feedback from our live systems and from our customers to kind of incorporate that in our products. And so 2 of the key topologies that I'm going to talk about a little bit today is, first of all, the stream-aligned team. So you can think of stream-aligned team as kind of this sort of cross-functional product teams. So there are a number of reasons why we call them stream-aligned teams, because product is also a bit overloaded word, and sometimes the boundaries within a large product are hard to define. But in terms of the responsibilities and the way that we expect them to work, is this sort of team, a build and run team, if you like, but hopefully with also kind of more decision-making power on, what are the things we should build, so that we can experiment and we can iterate over our service or product that we're responsible until we get, the right fit for our customers. So effectively, these streamlined teams have this end-to-end ownership of this part of the part of a larger product, or maybe it's a service by itself that they own. The problem here is that if you think about it, this means we would expect a team of usually 7, 8, 9 people at most to know everything in this sort of life cycle around not just building, testing, deploying, running, monitoring, telemetry, etc. Right? So that's a lot of skills and tooling and a lot of things that we are expecting from these teams. So that means if we don't do anything about it, if we try to promote this sort of teams, we're going to run into problems of too much cognitive load, too many things they have to be reasonably proficient with or have working knowledge of. So cognitive load actually is the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. So this is definition from John Sweller. He's a psychologist. So this is at an individual level, but we can kind of extrapolate to at the team level. Interestingly, there are different types of cognitive load, right? It's not one kind of big kind of, just one is not one kind of cognitive load. There are three different ones. So intrinsic cognitive loads, everything in terms of the things I need to know to do my day-to-day job. So if I'm a programmer in a Java system, then I need to know how to define classes, how to define methods and interfaces. All these sort of things are kind of fundamental to the work I need to do. We have extraneous cognitive load, which are all of kind of the, if you like, the superfluous or kind of surrounding tasks, which don't necessarily are not directly related to the value that we're delivering to our customers with the work we're doing, but are things we need to do, right? So we need to understand how to deploy our application or service. We need to understand how to maybe how to access some test environment. We need to understand how to run our test suites and many other things that we need to do in software delivery and operations to be able to provide the value that we want to give to our customers. And finally, germane aspects of cognitive load is everything related to the actual business problem we're trying to solve or the things we're trying to build to help our customers. So if we're working on banking applications, then we need to know, we should know a lot around, how bank transfers work, bank accounts, etc. So everything that's related to what we're actually trying to provide, solving problems or adding value to our products to help our customers. So you can kind of map them a little bit like this. Intrinsic is more or less the skills we need for our work. Extraneous are the mechanics, things that need to happen. And germane is everything around kind of all the things we need to know around our business domain so that we can achieve the value and provide the value to our customers. So when we understand this, then what we would want those streamlined teams that I was talking about that are usually focused on end customer products or services, we would like them to spend most of their cognitive capacity on the germane aspects, right? Solving the problems that our customers have or the organization has. And so that means we want to minimize intrinsic extraneous cognitive load. And so, of course, there are a number of techniques and approaches you can have around things like pair programming, or classical training, communities of practice, a lot of things that can help reduce, especially the intrinsic cognitive load. When we're talking about extraneous cognitive load, then that's not as easy because the teams have to do all these tasks to get their work delivered and running in production. That means that's where kind of the platforms that we were talking about just before come in and can help strongly reduce cognitive load by providing kind of lower level services that these teams are going to need to do their work. So if you're interested into going a bit deeper into these ideas of cognitive load and some of the ways we can reduce them, Joe Pierce has done a lot of work around that. So there's some resources there. But for the context of this discussion, that definition I gave you is sufficient. And so when we're talking about platforms, we should be mindful of the impact of the choices we make in the platform on the cognitive load of the teams, right? So we might be doing, trying to provide the best platform possible and the best choices possible. But if we don't really have a good understanding of what is going to what is the cognitive load today on our internal teams, what are the things that they know and what they don't know, we might actually be introducing more cognitive load, right? If we in the case of Kubernetes, if we just provide it as it is, and some of the teams don't have really sufficient knowledge around how Kubernetes works, then we might be imposing more cognitive load on them, because now that's something else that they need to know about, that they need to understand. And so we're actually not helping reduce that extraneous cognitive load. We might be increasing it. And the same for obviously any other kind of choices that we make around the platform. So let's see the example from Airbnb that I was talking about. How did they kind of help reduce the cognitive load of their development team? So they call them development teams at Airbnb, which is kind of more frequent than you would find organizations calling streamline teams. And so I'm sure you've heard about this quote when someone says the best part of my day is when I update 10 different YAML files to deploy one line code change. Well, I think that's something no one ever said, I hope. If they do, it's okay, but I don't usually find that people want to spend a lot of time in this sort of effectively extraneous tasks to be able to deliver the value of that one line code change, right? And so what Airbnb did is try to reduce the amount of kind of extraneous effort that was being spent by their development teams. So they made it easier for teams to deploy new services. They created very quite simple command line tool called KubeGen, an internal tool at Airbnb that teams can use. And what this tool does is based on a much smaller set of configurations that are really specific to the team's application or service that they are running. It generates a lot of the boilerplate YAML code, generates all the configurations needed for different environments. So they have production, of course, and then they have canary and dev environments for at Airbnb. And so this simple command line tool generates all these kind of configuration files that are needed to meet the workflows that they have at Airbnb. So where changes go through these different environments until they can go to production. And then it applies the changes to the clusters. So this is quite an interesting, quite simple way in which they effectively reduce the surface of configuration that the development teams have to know. Now they basically have to focus on what's here on the left side. The volumes, Docker files, the files, the file systems that they need, things that are specific to those development teams, and abstract away a lot of the details that are needed for Kubernetes, but that didn't really make a difference, or were not different between different development teams. So when we're clarifying this sort of boundaries, with that very simple tool, and we're providing good abstractions for our internal teams that reduce cognitive load that they have to actually, in this case, to effectively use Kubernetes to run their services. Another quite interesting example. So we have this interesting example on our website, teamtopologies.com, but it actually started with an article that the CTO of a company called USwitch. So I think that it's probably familiar to many of you. So it's USwitch is a company in the UK that provides comparison services for home services, like internet providers, electricity providers, etc. So it makes it easy for customers to compare and switch between different providers in the UK. And so a couple of years ago, Paul Ingalls wrote this article, and I found it quite fascinating. he was talking about why they adopted Kubernetes at Uswitch. So they were, to give you a bit of context, for several years they had quite autonomous teams. So they aligned their kind of stream-aligned teams, if you like, to the different kind of areas that their business focused on. So they had a team focused on kind of energy services comparison, other team on internet services comparison, etc. And all of those teams had almost, wouldn't say 100%, but very high autonomy in terms of deciding around which, they had to use AWS, but that was basically it. They could, they had their own accounts. They could use whatever services they thought they needed. They would set up their own kind of infrastructure on AWS to run their specific service. And so this worked quite well for a period of time because it has allowed the teams to make those sort of decisions very quickly, right? They didn't depend on any other team to decide, how do we set up our instances and security, and anything that they needed, they could decide upon. But also they started seeing over time, so I find this quite interesting, they started to have this graph of the low-level AWS service calls. So this is from 2015 to 2017. And that, naturally kept growing. But at the same time, they saw that these teams were becoming a bit slower to deliver new features or new kind of changes to their services. And they saw that effectively they could look at this as a sort of proxy for the cognitive load on these teams, right? So they had to, as they used more and more of this infrastructure on AWS, they had to know more and more about, different services, different ways that they were using AWS for their particular service. And so that meant it was taking up a lot of their cognitive capacity. And they decided to introduce Kubernetes because not because of technology itself, it was a good fit, but given the technology choices they had at the time, they were running basically on I think most services are running on EC2. They used Kubernetes because they wanted to change the organization. They wanted to introduce this idea of platform that would reduce cognitive load, that would provide this kind of common services in a way that was more effective for the organization. So like I said, they chose Kubernetes because it helped them. It was a good fit. They knew they would have better abstractions at the application level for their development teams. And they thought this would still allow us to minimize coordination if we get the right kind of configuration of our clusters for teams to be more independent. And so after they introduced this Kubernetes and they introduced the platform team, they started to see rather quickly a drop in the number of these low-level AWS service calls. They started to see that teams were adopting the platform services, the cloud infrastructure services, and started to see that they didn't have to worry as much about all these kind of lower level decisions. And they felt like they were now, basically freeing up more capacity to work on the customer problems and the things that the business wanted to address. And so the purpose of platform should be to enable these streamlined teams or development teams, however you call them, or product teams, to deliver their work more autonomously, while at the same time reducing the extraneous cognitive load, right? So we have these services that helps us be autonomous, that we can consume them autonomously. We don't depend on other teams. We just consume the platform, but at the same time, we can offload a lot of these concerns and details that we might have to worry about if there wasn't the platform, the internal platform. So Paul Ingalls also said in that article that they wanted to scale the teams, but maintain the principles that help them to move fast: autonomy, work with minimal coordination, self-service infrastructure. Where before self-service meant each team, would make the decisions and not depend on others. Now self-service meant there's a platform that provides you an easy way to get the things you need, because we have focused on those, your specific needs. We built a platform on top of the technology that provides the right abstractions and capabilities. So therefore, we go back to the idea of treating the platform as a product. So specifically, that means it should be, of course, reliable, should be fit for purpose. We're actually delivering the features and capabilities that our teams need. And the developer experience needs to be quite high, right? If we provide services that are hard to understand, or documentation is poor, or it's not intuitive, then for the development teams, then again, we might be introducing more cognitive load than we wanted. So I won't go into all the details, but reliable platform, of course, you need to worry about things like what is the on-call support, what are the communication channels, response, incident response procedures, etc. Being fit for purpose needs, effectively, we want the platform teams to work in very similar way to the Streamline teams, except the product is the platform. It's not something that we provide to external clients, right? So, but we should do this sort of iterative development, prototype if we can, get quick feedback from our internal teams, our engineering teams, with this sort of agile mindset, just like the other teams should have. And effectively, part of this is also understanding what are the things we shouldn't build. Having less services that provide better quality and are better fit, rather than building a lot of things that might be useful, but we cannot then ensure that they have the right level of quality, developer experience, etc. And very importantly, we need strong product management if we're treating the platform as a product. And so specifically around the developer experience, we need to understand what is the common language between the platform and the development teams or the Streamline teams. And what is the right level of abstractions today, right? So the abstractions might change over time, where we might make some abstractions, might increase the level of abstraction to make it even easier to use and less cognitive load. But we need to understand what is the kind of the skills and the where are our teams today, and provide the right levels of abstraction today. So USwitch was also interesting because the way they went about introducing platform was quite, I would say, agile as well. So they identified, so they were thinking of this as an internal product. They said, who is going to be our first customer before we even build anything. And so they identified one team that actually, in terms of engineering maturity, were a bit behind for whatever reasons. And they actually helped them improve around things like centralized logging, metrics, auto-scaling. So they got very quick feedback from that one first customer. And then they started growing and trying to get the platform adopted effectively by more teams, because that was the point of making it scalable and scale out to hopefully the entire organization. So they had to kind of prove the value of the platform as well, start looking at the SLOs and clarifying, what is the reliability of the platform, latency, support, etc., so that teams would feel more confident. Okay, we can start using platform for certain things that we used to do ourselves before. And finally, they worked on some kind of cross-functional needs, which will also help show the value of the platform, things that no individual team would usually address by themselves because it was too much effort, was hard to justify by one team individually. But when you looked at the at the whole organization, it actually made sense to provide some services. They did kind of an easier way to get alerts and SLO dashboards and things like this, and some security aspects around database secrets and things like this. And eventually they got effectively all the teams to adopt this new platform. So the anecdote here is that one team that was kind of more reluctant was actually the team that was considered to have higher kind of engineering maturity, and were kind of ahead of all the teams. They were also providing comparatively more revenue. So the highest money making team is the joke here. So this team was more reluctant because they had built up all the knowledge and all the kind of skills inside the team to provide a high level of resilience and fit for purpose of their own kind of customer focused service. But eventually they realized, and they okay, yes, it makes sense to adopt the platform. This is going to offload some of the things we have to worry about today, and allow us to do more on the business side. Of course, when we're talking about platform, there are a number of metrics we should be looking at, especially if we're looking at platform as a product. That means we're not just looking at kind of the more technical aspects. Of course, that's important, but also we should be looking at satisfaction, right? Our internal users and teams satisfied with the platform product, right? So we can do simple things like a quarterly survey or monthly or whatever frequency makes sense to just kind of have an understanding of how people and how teams feel about the platform. Do they feel like it helps them deploy and run their services more effectively? And if it's compelling, right, it's the right platform and feature set and things, and provides the things that the teams need. So this is actually an example from Twilio, as a company in the US. And they do this internally, and it really helps them identify where things might be going off track a little bit, and especially in the beginning of a new platform or new service, quite important to have an understanding: is this actually helping our teams? We also should be looking at the adoption and engagement of with the platform. Can be with the overall platform or for each platform service. So it doesn't have to be something, can be something quite simple, like how many teams are using the platform overall, or how many teams are using a particular service versus all the teams that we have. Because again, remember, the platform, we're treating it as a compelling internal product. We're not treating it as, this is something that we mandate on all the teams so that we standardize everything, because that might actually not be helping our teams. So we want to have a feeling and some metrics on, is adoption going up? If we're introducing a new service, can we see that there are more and more teams onboarding this new service, and therefore we're on the right track. And of course, there are other metrics around reliability, kind of the delivery itself of the platform, lead time for new features, deployment frequency of the platform changes, etc. So there are a number of metrics, but in particular, the first two categories, sometimes we don't really think about it until we think of the platform as a product. At the end of the day, we can say the platform is successful, and the teams building the platform if the Streamline teams are successful, right? If the Streamline teams are able to deliver faster with more value to our end customers, to our external customers, by using the platform. And so it's not just about the teams. Also, we need to understand the interactions that we should have in place, so that we have the right evolution of the platform, right? So it's not just saying, well, we need a platform team, or we need 3 platform teams. is also how are they going to interact with the Streamline teams to get the right platform. And so going back again to the Airbnb example, effectively, if we can overlay the kind of teams that they have here. So what they have are the development teams relying on this KubeGen tool and other tools. This is one example. And effectively, everything that's kind of underneath is kind of abstracted to some extent in a sort of platform, right? So they don't call them themselves platform team. They call it's the infrastructure team. But it is also quite interesting because that this infrastructure team at Airbnb is working and providing these tools and self-service capabilities, which is very different from what an infrastructure team might do in other organizations. And so that's also part of why the topologies, understanding what are the responsibilities and expected behaviors of different types of teams is important, right? So anyway, that infrastructure team at Airbnb is effectively a platform type of team. And so this simple tool actually provides a very good boundary now, a kind of service boundary that helps us reason about what should development teams know about and what other things they don't need to know about that we can abstract to make their life easier and reduce their cognitive load. Effectively, this service boundary provides us the in a way, a common language, right, between the infrastructure or platform teams and the development teams. And so it also helps in the sort of communication between these different teams in the organization. We're explicitly defining this sort of interface between teams that is at the right level of abstraction. In terms of behaviors, then we expect strong collaboration with Streamline teams. So a platform with Streamline teams for when we're evolving or creating a new service or even some new features in the platform. So there's where we talk about this specific interaction on collaboration, where we should have a specific purpose and expected duration for this collaboration, right? So we don't leave it open-ended. We are saying, well, can we, we need to collaborate for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months if it's something larger, so that we together we at least identify, how should this API look like or this command line tool look like? What are the use cases that you need to, as a Streamline team, that you need us to implement in the platform so that you can, so it's adequate to your needs. On the other hand, we need to, as a platform, we need to provide support and the right level of documentation. We need to stabilize services as well, right? So that we have the right level of reliability in the platform. So that's when we talk about focusing on X as a service, right? So in the same way that AWS or Google Cloud or any kind of provider, kind of, you don't expect to really have to interact with them because you have the service, you have the APIs, you have the documentation, and usually that's at the right level of quality and so that you can consume those easily. So the platform team needs to understand the customer needs and collaborate with those customers internally when they're developing new services or features. But we also need to then spend part of our time on stabilizing, making this service easy to understand, reliable enough that we can say, we can provide this as a service to all the teams in the organization. So one quick note that when we're kind of, it looks like we're hiding everything which is inside the platform. Effectively, that's, we don't expect that to happen, right? We're not saying development teams should not know anything about how Kubernetes works, right? We're saying we need the right level of abstraction to reduce cognitive load, but it's fine to have development teams that have more in-depth knowledge and that can help, that can actually be quite beneficial for the platform team to understand have a more in-depth conversation about what the development teams need and how they can implement that on top of Kubernetes. But just want to make that side note. It's not we're saying no, development teams cannot know about Kubernetes. It's just they don't need to know if they or they shouldn't need to know as much as if we just here's Kubernetes, now use it. And then over time, to give you another example from Airbnb, they had, of course, other tooling that was helpful. They had the one for deployments. And then they realized, with this kind of internal customer approach, they realized, well, actually something that's quite painful for many teams is to troubleshoot when there are problems in their services running in Kubernetes. So I actually found, or I saw this on LinkedIn at some point, where someone took the trouble of creating this flow chart, or how do you debug and troubleshoot Kubernetes deployments. And so their this is just half of the flow chart. So effectively, this is an indication of how high the cognitive load it is for a team to do this sort of troubleshooting. So what they did at Airbnb is okay, we realize this is quite an important need and problem today for many teams. The fact is this is so time consuming and capacity consuming for development teams. And so they collaborated with some of those teams, understand, what would be a way to make this easier. They created another command line tool called Diagnose. And then they kind of refined it. They improved documentation to make this available to all the teams in the organization. And so the platform is evolving naturally, right? Now they had another kind of simple tool for development teams to use, where basically it's collecting a number of logs and status in an easy way, so that provide all that information together in one step for the development teams to use, and maybe provide some kind of possible indications of some possible problems based on some common issues. And this sort of natural evolution of the platform is also helpful for, and they're having these sort of abstractions that are at the right level for your internal teams can also help deal with and address issues with, not issues, I should say, the fact that the landscape of, the cloud native landscape, this might look familiar, or should be, I guess will look familiar for many of you, is the cloud native landscape. This is probably out of date. There are probably a bunch more by now. I think that I took this when I was giving this talk at KubeCon end of last year. And so the way that this sort of internal platform helps is that we might have some abstractions, some services in the platform where we might be able to make better decisions in terms, okay, there's this new tool or technology in the landscape that we could use and replace some of the things we have today in the platform, perhaps without even causing any impact on the development teams. Perhaps we have an abstraction that allows us to do this sort of internal kind of switch of technology, maybe not 100% invisible to development teams, but at least they don't have to change the way they work. In other cases, it might be that we need a compromise where to get some benefits from using some new technology. We might need the development teams to change a little bit the way they use the platform service, but at least we have a way to have this conversation, which is not so tooling focused. It's focused on the usage of the platform services that we have. And in some cases, it might even be that we can leverage whatever is new is a better approach without impacting the workflow of our consumers, of our internal teams. And the same for others, any kind of tools. So this is actually from USwitch. They have some open source projects. This one is I think it's the one that where they provided a service to generate SLO dashboards and alerts integrated with their chat tools. Anyway, you have a lot of open source projects that might not be on the CNCF landscape that you might also want to leverage. And like I said, this might be things that we can do inside the platform that don't even impact our consumers. So to finalize, just a few tips on how to get started with what I call this sort of team-centric Kubernetes adoption, not as much tool-centric. Once we understand that we need this sort of internal platform, that we need to think about interactions and responsibilities of different teams. So one is assessing cognitive load. So looking at your streamline teams or development teams, can we actually understand, if we already have Kubernetes in-house, how well do they understand the abstractions? What are the things that are difficult for them to do on a regular basis? Again, the Airbnb example is quite good. They were identifying things that were difficult for their development teams, that were consuming a lot of their time. And so those are the things that are actually increasing cognitive load that we should be addressing, perhaps with better abstractions or some new platform service. Secondly, we should have a clear definition of a platform. So it's often many organizations don't actually have a clear definition of what is the platform, what are the services that we provide in our internal platform. And also, what is the gap between whatever implementation we have today of Kubernetes and this sort of platform as a product approach and this sort of digital platform definition that we saw today? What are the things that we don't have that we need to address to actually have this sort of digital platform? Thinking about team interactions, right, and responsibilities. How do we collaborate on new services? Or is this something that we're just assuming we know from a platform standpoint? We just assume we know what we need to build, and actually start thinking about, we need intentional, explicit collaboration with our streamline teams, our product teams. And we need to understand when we need to collaborate versus when we need to stabilize a service and make it available in this sort of X as a service way. The rest are some slides with resources. So I'll make these slides available. And there's also an article based on this talk. If you're interested, that might be easier to share, has some more insights. We have a number of resources on GitHub, as well as our website, teamtopologies.com. We have a half-day training. We're actually planning to expand that into maybe a full day around principles and practices for modern platforms. Obviously, a lot focused on platform as a product idea, and how is that different from kind of traditional way we think about platforms. And want to thank you for attending this talk. Again, apologies for the early problems with the connection. I have a few minutes that I can answer some questions.
If I understand correctly, I don't see any questions coming.
So you can use
I don't see it.
Use the chat if you want, or
speak up, because if you're going to watch the YouTube recording, you're not going to be able to ask any questions. So probably there are no more questions, or no questions at all. And Manuel, thank you for the awesome presentation. Really enjoyed it. I believe that for the community,
thank you.
For our community, learned a lot, and taking those practices into the real life scenario that we can adapt, and at least to think about where to head it to, and what to expect, right? So thank you very much for being with us, and yeah, it was very interesting. And I hope so to see you, to host you again sometime next year, probably.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. And so we'll make the you'll make the video available, I guess, to the meetup.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
and I share a link in our meetup page.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you, everyone, again for attending.
Thank you.
Bye bye.